It's as if the great armed force which is created to fight the Cold War is at the president's own disposal for any diversion he may wish, no matter what it costs. He will wreck our military. This is a quote from the Democratic Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan of New York, and this is an example of how much support there was for America's decision to engage in the Gulf War. This was not a time to risk the lives of American citizens to ensure more political and strategic power in the world. This was a time to stay safe and recover from the detrimental effects of the long and bloody Vietnam War. The U.S. could not afford to lose any more lives of American soldiers or suffer economically because they wanted to sufficiently contribute to this war. The public popular opinion believed this was a war we did not need to be involved in, so why take any risks? Ultimately, George W. Bush believed that this war was worth fighting for, and a congressional vote just narrowly allowed the use of force. But that was all the permission he needed. Let the war begin. It all started on August 2, 1990. Iraqi President Saddam Hussein ordered his army to invade the neighboring country of Kuwait, which ultimately sparked international warfare. Around 50 countries joined forces to contribute some form of assistance to Kuwait, and 38 of those countries supplied forces to actually be in the war. Many people ask the question of why would Iraq invade Kuwait when there was such a huge risk of being attacked from other supporting countries? The answer is that Saddam Hussein was power hungry and wanted to expand his influence in the world. Iraq built up a massive debt of around $30 billion from the recent war with Iran and wanted to be in control of Kuwait's oil reserves. Hussein claimed that Kuwait was siphoning crude oil from one of the oil fields along their common border. Because of this, he insisted that Kuwait, along with Saudi Arabia, pay off their country's debt. When they refused to pay, Iraq decided to invade and take control of the oil fields themselves. Being in control of the oil fields would help them economically, give them authority over most of the oil in the Middle East, which would put them in a good, powerful position in the world. Hussein also tried to justify the invasion by saying that Kuwait was an artificial state that was taken from Iraq by Western colonizers. But this is simply not true because Kuwait was established as its own country before Iraq was. The final straw was when the president of Egypt initiated a negotiation between Iraq and Kuwait in an attempt to avoid any unnecessary intervention, but Hussein broke off the negotiations after only 2 hours, and the invasion started shortly after. Hussein was mistaken in his belief that his fellow Arab states would support the decision of war and not call in any outside help because Saudi Arabia and Kuwait immediately turned to the U.S. for support. The U.S. had reason to believe that this was a dangerous threat and needed to be dealt with. U.S. officials were worried that this invasion was Iraq's first step in consolidating power in the Middle East. If they were able to successfully take over Kuwait without interference, they would be in a good position economically with money coming in from the oil fields, and they would be a powerful nation controlling important resources. They also had a military with about 1 million soldiers, making it the world's fourth largest military force. George Bush could not risk a dangerous political leader like Hussein to gain so much power, so he intended to put a stop to the invasion altogether. Even though Bush believed the right decision was to help Kuwait, he still needed to be sensitive to his country, as he did not have an overwhelming amount of political or societal support. He knew that the war had to be short and relatively non-violent in order to maintain his support, and he also knew that Hussein knew America's weakness and would try to exploit it. Before the invasion, Hussein told the American ambassador to Baghdad that yours is a society which cannot accept 10,000 dead in one battle. Bush was aware of this and knew that he needed to implement a strategy that would be successful but not risk the lives of American soldiers. The U.S. sent fighter planes to Saudi Arabia along with several other countries in order to contain Iraq and Kuwait until they were prepared to launch an attack. During this time, Iraq increased its number of troops to around 300,000 and declared this as a holy war in hopes of getting more support from neighboring nations. Now that each country has made their decisions, the war begins and the U.S. strategy starts to take shape. On November 29, 1990, the UN Security Council authorized the use of all necessary means of force against Iraq if they did not withdraw their troops from Kuwait by January 15, 1991. During this time, the U.S. and other allies prepared forces of around 750,000 to face off against Iraq. And the time came around, Iraq still did not surrender, and the U.S. took first action. A massive air attack led by the U.S. took place and hit Iraq's air defenses. The U.S. had 6 military objectives for their attack codenamed Desert Storm, and they were in order: 1. Attack Iraqi political and military leadership and command and control. 2. Gain and maintain air superiority. 3. Sever Iraqi supply lines. 4. Destroy chemical, biological, and nuclear capability. 5. Destroy Republican Guard forces. And 6. Liberate Kuwait City. These objectives were led by attacking in the air and continuing to control the air. This is essential to their success, because Iraq's military planned to stay defensive and continue to build troops while the attacking countries wasted time and money. But controlling the air was the U.S.'s attempt to prevent further expansion from Iraq, and ensure that they would not have to face an unbeatable number of soldiers. While the U.S. was still preparing, Iraqi troops were able to rise to around 540,000, and they hoped to survive any number of air attacks while remaining prepared to strike back. They attempted to draw on enemy forces and use Scud missiles to take them down. As we know, these attempts were relatively unsuccessful, as the U.S. didn't allow the Iraqi troops to get any traction as they continuously attacked them in the air. The biggest problem the U.S. military faced was time. This is the one thing in life that you can never get back, and the thing you always need more of. This sentiment was most definitely true for the U.S. military. As they developed their defenses in Saudi Arabia, which is supposed to take another few months to complete, General H. Norman Schwarzkopf was told he needed to begin planning for the offensive part of the operation. Schwarzkopf, the commander of the U.S. forces, previously told Bush that this operation would not be possible for another 8 to 12 months, but they did not have the luxury of time in this situation. He went on to say, "I don't recall any time in military history when a theater commander had been asked to put together offensive plans for a force of 300 or 400,000, been told to do it in a matter of a few days with no strategic guidance, and then been asked to defend that plan in detail." He has very valid concerns about the time constraints, and does not want to form a plan that will lose the many lives of American soldiers and in turn lose the war. The expectation was that he was to have the shortest ground war possible and maintain air control in order for Bush to receive the most political support. It was November 11, 1990, when Bush told the general that they had to be prepared by January 15th, which was the ultimatum the UN gave Iraq to withdraw from Kuwait. Both the president and the general understood that they could not wait too long after January 15th to strike Iraq, so they prepared to attack at that time, whether they were ready or not. Under the pressure of time and urgency to end this war as quickly as possible, General Schwarzkopf began conducting what is known as one of the most dominant victories in U.S. history. He knew that his ground operations would not be ready, so he would send out air forces until he was confident in the ground forces. It was this idea that he would not waver from. In a conversation with the British commander, Schwarzkopf said that if they don't give him the time he needs to develop his ground operations, he would quit. His decision to hold off on the ground was a wise one, and most likely the one that won them the war so swiftly and efficiently. Now, the war has begun. The U.S. made their first offensive move, and they established control of the air as soon as they could. They began Operation Desert Storm on January 17th, when they sent their air force to Kuwait. Reflecting on the war afterwards, this decision to immediately control the skies was the key to their success. Air power was a force that could fulfill both the political and military needs of the country, because it would provide quick action and hold of the Iraqi armies for as long as possible. The U.S. was able to set the tone and tempo of the war through giving Iraq an intense first 2 days of attacks. They tore down Iraqi air defenses and targeted their ground forces, causing many of them to retreat or go into hiding. They were able to use recent advancement in military technology to their advantage. This included the use of stealth bombers, which are bombs that are nearly impossible to detect, cruise missiles, which are also known as pilotless planes and can follow a desired path until it explodes, infrared night bombing equipment, which allowed the U.S. to effectively attack at night, and smart bombs, with laser-guided systems, which allows the bombs to find a target with pinpoint accuracy. This arsenal of weaponry proved deadly for Iraqi troops, as they immediately lost air control and were forced to stay out of sight out of fear of being an easy target. The U.S. continued their relentless attack by sending between 2,000 to 3,000 sorties a day, which added up to almost 100,000 sorties in the first month of attacks. By January 27th, they had completely removed Iraq's air force from the fight, giving their own army more freedom to continue preparing on the ground without being attacked. This also gave the U.S. reign over the skies, which allowed them to specifically target Iraq's political and military leadership, command and control, supply lines, weapons of mass destruction, and their forces on the ground. Thousands of troops were killed or fled, tanks were destroyed, and Iraq was demoralized. As an outsider looking in, it seems pretty obvious that America is winning this war without a doubt. It makes me wonder why Saddam Hussein continued to fight, risk the lives of his soldiers and the remaining dignity of his country just to keep fighting a losing war. Having no air control and nowhere to go without being bombed, there is no chance of survival. It is just a matter of how bad he wanted to lose, and it looks like he wanted to lose pretty badly, because he still did not surrender. Whenever Iraqi ground forces would attempt a strategic move, such as attempting to move to Kafji, this would only increase their exposure to air attacks. They were unable to move and fight effectively because of the hold America's air power had over them. This led to the ground war beginning on February 24th, only 6 weeks after the air attacks began. They had thousands of tanks along with tens of thousands of troops on the ground. The Iraqi army was causing destruction in Kuwait and began blowing up their oil fields. They destroyed over 200 oil wells in total before officially surrendering. The coalition was able to surround the Iraqi troops and defeat them within 4 days of beginning their attack. They were able to liberate Kuwait from the clutches of Iraq and claim victory in this dominant war. The U.S. also sent troops directly into Iraq, targeting their armored reserves from the back, which was a surprise attack and ultimately led to another American victory. In the end, the complete and utter destruction brought on by the U.S. led to the Iraqi forces' surrender on February 28th, only 100 hours after the ground attack began. The political agenda was well met, considering they wanted an efficient attack that did not take up too much time or money and didn't put American lives at risk. They were able to do this in an empowering fashion, as the total attack time was a little over a month, which is very short for a war, and only 219 U.S. soldiers died in the war. For a war that included almost 50 countries and attacking the enemy for over a month, having only 219 deaths is a victory, especially when comparing it to the tens of thousands of deaths that the Iraqis endured. It is easy to overlook the complexity of the American strategy in this war, but without General Schwarzkopf conducting his army the way he did, the war may have ended much differently. Looking back, it was essential to gain air control right away, and this was a decision that needed to be made. He was under such time constraints that the fact that he was able to put together a strategy that worked so effectively and efficiently is outstanding, and the general was an essential person in winning this war. The U.S. was able to defy the odds by achieving this victory in a very short period of time and lose as little lives as possible. This is going to go down as one of the most impressive military strategies and performances of all time, as it was a demonstration of pure domination from America.